Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. It's terrific to see a packed room for what I know will be a terrific conversation tonight. My name is Steve Edwards. I'm the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics, and pleased to welcome you to tonight's conversation about the future of America's labor unions with an outstanding panel of guests. Tonight's event is part of our ongoing series that we produce throughout the year here at the Institute of Politics, where we bring key leaders to talk about and amplify the most important issues of the day, to elevate and expand the public conversation as we work at the Institute of Politics. We have a couple of other events I wanted to mention very, very briefly. Tomorrow night, we will, in partnership with others at the university, be hosting former French Prime Minister Dominique de Villepin. He'll be at Mandel Hall at 5:30 p.m. rather, 5:30 p.m. at Mandel Hall for a conversation looking at intervention abroad. He will be delivering a lecture and then in conversation with members of the audience. So it should be an outstanding conversation. We look forward to seeing you there. I also wanted to put in a personal plug for the event that we have scheduled on Monday with Timothy Shriver. Some of you may know Timothy Shriver as the head of Special Olympics. He's out with a new book. It's a memoir called Fully Alive, Discovering What Matters Most. And I'm just about a third of the way through this book. It is absolutely beautiful. It's deeply moving and remarkably inspiring. It's a book that is talking about his own experiences heading the Special Olympics, but really a life working with people with intellectual disabilities. And more than that, though, it's really, I think for a lot of you in this room, will resonate because he's talking about politics, as he calls it, with a small p. The idea not politics as an exercise in power, but politics as an exercise in service. It's a remarkable book, and that conversation will take place on Monday at 6 p.m. at the Institute of Politics. You can find out about all of this and the many other events upcoming at politics.uchicago.edu. Nearly everything we do is free and open to the public. Tonight's event is being recorded for podcast. You can check out our podcasts by going to our website and going to iTunes and subscribing to UChicago IOP. As is customary here at the Institute, during our public events, we create time near the end of our conversation for questions from you, members of the audience. When we do, we ask that you keep your question short and to the point, that it be a question so that we can get to as many of you as possible. We will also prioritize where we can students who are with us in the audience as well. Tonight's conversation is inspired by questions about the role and power of organized labor in American political and economic life today. And many of you know these statistics. If you go back just 30 years, 20% of all workers in the United States belong to a union. Today, that number is 11%. Amidst a widening income gap and an ongoing debate over the minimum wage, the question becomes, is organized labor on a slow path to increasing decline, or is it poised for a rebound? And we're honored to have some of the foremost leaders in the American labor movement with us here tonight for the conversation. I should mention that Richard Trumka is en route. He, of course, is the president of AFL-CIO. He will be here, we hope, momentarily, and will join our conversation in progress. But in the meantime, please join me as we welcome Leo Gerard, International President of the United Steelworkers Union, Eliseo Medina, former Secretary-Treasurer of the Service Employees International Union, and a fellow here at the Institute of Politics. Please join me in welcoming them. And moderating tonight's conversation is Stephen Greenhouse, the labor and workplace reporter for the New York Times. He's also the author of the acclaimed 2008 book entitled The Big Squeeze, Tough Times for the American Worker. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming the panel. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve, for that very nice introduction. I hope the microphone is working. It's very impressive to see so many people out on a cold night to hear a panel on labor. So while some people might say labor is dying, to see so many people out wanting to listen to labor is certainly a good sign. And it's very nice that Mr. Trump, that President Trump is here. Just in the nick of time, he's going to say... So Richard Trumka, the president of the AFL-CIO, he's going to save the girl on the railroad tracks right now. So we're just starting. You really haven't missed anything except Mr. Edwards' very nice introduction. I haven't.
Very good.
So I was just about to ask my first question, and The director said, "Come in now," so that was very good. So it's, the labor movement has been very important in our nation's history. It's true. I love that slogan. The folks who gave you the weekend, the labor movement. Last Tuesday, the labor movement took it on the chin in many elections in Wisconsin, Florida, North Carolina, some other states. And I think the big question now is, where does organized labor go from here? And I wanted to begin with a question to President Trumka. Oftentimes in recent elections, labor has kind of saved the Democrats in state after state and race after race, with your fabled, foot soldiers knocking on doors. But this year, Scott Walker, your #1 opponent, won. Rick Scott won. So what happened this year? Why do you think labor wasn't able to save the Democrats?
Well, first let me just sort of capitalize what happened in the election, because I think it encompasses a lot of what you're saying, Steve. The election was really an interesting thing. The vast majority of people in that election said the economy is their #1 issue. Vast majority. 54% of the people that voted in the election said their wages are declining, and 34% said that they're flat. So 87% actually of the people that voted either had flat or declining wages. They said that only 29% of them said that the Republicans had an economic platform or an economic program to win. But they also said they heard nothing, no coherent economic message from the Democratic side. They rejected nearly every one of the platforms that the Republicans ran on. 80% of the voters said that Wall Street has too much power. They reject raising the wage for Social Security, or the age for Social Security. They reject raising the age for Medicare. They reject doing away with regulations. They voted, 9 states or 11 states voted for an increase in the minimum wage, even in red states that won. And yet, after going through all of that, they voted for Republican candidates in numbers. Now, what happened was, normally we provide a 20%, 22% margin, working folks, not just unionized labor, but working folks did. In this election, we only got a 12% margin. A lot of working folks stayed home because they did not hear any kind of coherent economic message that addressed their individual needs or raising wages, because that was our top priority.
Leo, Leo's president of the Steelworkers Union, which I think pound for pound is as much politically, member per member does as much politically as any union in the nation. So many people are asking, with labor unions losing members, losing density, can unions be as powerful in the future as they have been in the past politically?
I think that they certainly can. I want to sort of jump off Rich's points. Everything that Rich said is completely and totally accurate. But you put beside that, this is the first midterm election that saw the kind of unreported, unbelievable amounts of what now we euphemistically call dark money. And the Republican Party has spent the last 4 years, if not the last 6 years, denigrating the president. And they ran against the president with no platform. And beside that, even in Wisconsin and those places, we had lower voter turnout across the nation, but lower voter turnout in places like Wisconsin and other places than we've ever had. And the people that stayed home, every demographic group stayed home, but the group that stayed home the most was white males. And part of the reason that you look at that from the point of view of the Steelworkers Union is that we lost 65,000 factories. Those people don't know who's standing up for them. And the Democrats had no program. The Republicans denigrated the president, and they basically ran against the president with misrepresentation and lies. So my view is that we need to go back to rebuild and continue building the grassroots program. We need to convince the Democrats that they need to quit standing up for Wall Street and start standing up for Main Street. And I think an important first step about that, I think an important symbolic maybe first step about that is Harry Reid came to a census today and asked Elizabeth Warren to stand up and help form the progressive agenda. And so I think that that's pointing us at least in the right direction. And I think that we're going to come back. And this is only one election. I remember when we kicked butt in '08, they said the Republicans were done. They're never going to, this will swing back and forth. The Republicans will be done in 2016 when we kick their ass.
Some people say that there's something wrong with the political system, that workers don't have enough of a voice. Some Republicans say there's something wrong with the political system, unions have too much of a voice. Just wanted to ask you to respond to that.
Well, if you look at what the American public said in this last election, over 80% of them said that corporations and Wall Street have too much power. They also want to get money out of politics. Look, we get outspent 18-19 to 1. And in some places like Wisconsin, money flooded in and actually polluted the entire system. I think it actually threatens democracy, because there's no way the average American can compete with somebody who's going to dump $100 million into an election. When you look at the map where the Koch brothers played, if you put a little dot in every one of the districts and make it yellow, almost the entire United States would be covered with yellow, because they played everywhere. I mean, they're attempting to buy the best Congress so that they can get their hands on. And when people had, and as I said earlier, people rejected, the voters rejected their economic program, but voted for them anyway. And when they had their chance for self-help, they voted 11 states to increase minimum wage, personal sick days, paid sick days. When they had a chance to defend democracy, every one of the states passed the resolutions that made it easier to vote, not harder to vote. So that's been the program, to make voting harder, and then to flood the airwaves with money.
So how do you interpret what happened? So what, Arkansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, Alaska, and the state we're in, Illinois, all voted statewide for a higher minimum wage, yet all of these states basically elected a lot of Republicans who oppose raising the minimum wage. What do you make of that? How do you interpret that?
They heard no coherent economic message from the Democrats. There was no message back to say, here's what we stand for. And here's the other major point that I think that needs to be made. People don't want to hear messages. They want to hear an agenda. They want to know that people that talk about something are going to fight for the things that they talk about. They want to push an agenda, and they punished a lot of candidates who they thought were messaging and didn't have an agenda. And many of those candidates were Democrats.
So you're saying in many ways the political system is broken. Many folks are also upset with the Koch brothers, say what we need, what the United States needs is public financing of elections. Would you, as the head of the AFL-CIO, would you as union leaders support that, or do you have reservations about it?
I would have no reservations about supporting public funding for elections. I think it's the only way that a little person, the average Jane or Joe, is going to get a chance to run. We used to say anybody can grow up and be the president. You can run to be the president. Well, if you believe that, I have oceanfront property in southwestern Pennsylvania that I'll sell you cheap. Because you can't unless you can raise what they raised the last election, over $1 billion each. $1 billion. $2 billion in the presidential election. Think how many people we could feed, how many kids could go to school, all the good things we could do with that money.
This was a $4.5 billion midterm. And I think public financing of elections is absolutely important, and we all ought to be working for that, and we ought to be getting the money out of the system as much as possible. But the other thing we ought to be working for is mandatory voting. That instead of having things where we got to fight voter suppression and crazy rules to keep people from voting, let's not forget that 40 years ago, Republicans said we do better when less people vote. And what we should be arguing for, Australia's got mandatory voting. Brazil's got mandatory voting. A number of Scandinavian countries have mandatory voting. We should be talking about not only having public financing of elections, but mandatory voting. If you want government services, you got to vote.
So I think all of us grew up in the 1950s and 1960s, all of us oldsters on the stage. And at that time, you know, the labor movement represented about 35% of American workers. Now it represents just 11.3% and just 6.7% in the private sector, about 1/5 of what it represented in the private sector in the 1950s and 1960s. Let me ask you, Eliseo, you know, what can be done, you know, what do you think can be done to turn things around? And then Rich and Leo, please chime in.
Well, thank you very much, Steve. And one thing that I just want to add to the previous questions, it seems to me that labor by themselves cannot carry the election for the Democrats or for any party. First of all, you get stuck with lousy candidates with no agenda. It's really hard to go out and then make the case to the American people that they ought to vote for a party or a candidate. And so I think that the problems of this country are way too big for any one group to fix it by themselves. So one of the things that I think we need to do is be able to create a broader coalition with other people who share our vision for America and who care about the same things we do. And organizing, you know, you talked about the 1950s. You know, I'm old enough that I was actually started organizing before any of you were born. You know, I'm in my 49th year as a union organizer. And I remember,
Eliseo is telling me that when he was 21 years old, the great Cesar Chavez sent him to Chicago at 21 to organize the great boycott here.
Yeah, so I've been doing this for 19 years. And
49.
So I was 19 years old, so I've been doing it for 49 years, long time. So when I started organizing, there was still widespread support for people being treated fairly, for decent wages and working conditions. And the government still acted as the neutral arbiter when there were disputes between labor, to a large degree, not completely, but to a large degree. And business actually looked on unions as part of, they were their partners. Now, Steve, this is the worst attack that I have ever seen in 49 years on working people. I mean, what happened in Ohio, what happened in Wisconsin, Indiana, you name it, Michigan. And even though it's a given that we're all dodging bullets and that we got people that are trying to destroy unions because we are the largest and with our members' dues best funded, opposition to their extreme agenda, that what we need to be able to do to turn this around is we need to do a couple of things in my estimation. One is that while we're dodging bullets, we can't always be on the defensive. We got to take the offense. And so what we need to be able to do is put together the most ambitious, well-funded organizing program to go out and have a conversation with American workers about why they can help drive change in this country. They don't necessarily need to be the victims of change. They can be the agents of change. And we have to go out and do it throughout this country. Secondly, is that we have, since the 1930s, been tied to a collective bargaining model that basically says is that we go out and we organize through the NLRB, then we have an election, and then we got to go have a fight for a contract, and then we get a contract and the employer's trying to decertify us. And they fire people left and right. So what we need to do is be able to say, let's go back to what labor's always done. What's a union? A union is a group of people that get together to fight for their best interest. The employers now have just emasculated the National Labor Relations Board. Now, instead of the National Labor Relations Board, it could rightfully be called the National Lawyers Relief Board, because that's what it does. So what we need to do, if they want to have a fight, the law of the jungle, we know how to fight that too. And I think you're beginning to see that beginning to happen more and more. The Fight for 15 is an example of that, where it's not about organizing a union, but actually going out and demanding that there be a wage increase for everybody. Now, that doesn't would deal with the members of Leo's union that make more than 15, but it does get the American people into the fight. So because we can't do it by ourselves.
What Alicio just said is that if we get people at the bottom raising their wages, it helps our members.
Yeah.
Because otherwise we get pushed down. And one of the things that was going through my mind, in 1985, I was the newly elected regional director in our union. I was sitting at a table with some of the older guys. And our chief economist at the time, a fellow by the name of Jim Smith, said, you know, folks, there's a fight going on in this country and no one's paying attention. One of the people at the table said, what's the fight about? He said, the fight going on between the people that make money by manipulating paper and the people that make money by making things. If the people that make money by manipulating paper win, we're in deep trouble. And I think what you've got right now is that we've been on a 30-year downward slide because America has chosen to look for a low-wage model through rotten trade deals. And every one of those trade deals that have been passed has cost us factories, it cost us collective bargaining power, and when Stephen said that the private sector is down to 6.5 or 7%, I can tell you in our union, none of that is as a result of deserts, none of that is as a result of people wanting to leave our union. What it is as a result of plant closures, because first they went to Mexico, and then when Mexico's wages were going to be too high, they went to China. And then when China's wages got too high, they're coming back to Mexico, and now they're worried about that bouncing, so we're going to get a TPP, and we're going to have to compete with Vietnam, where wages are 26 cents an hour. That's part of a low-wage economic strategy. And I agree that what we need, and Richard has, to give him credit, Richard tried to do that at our last FLCO convention. We brought people from all the progressive sectors, and we're trying to build a progressive movement. The labor movement doesn't just speak for organized workers. The labor movement speaks for all workers. That's why we brought you the weekend. That's why we fought for Social Security. That's why we've got pensions. That's why we've got dental plans. None of those were given to us by benevolent dictators that we called employers. You know, every one of those was fought for. And now you see every one of those coming down as the labor movement is weaker, and you see the income disparity. You see the kind of gap between those that trying to make a living and those that are living off manipulating money. And if we don't do something about that, and what I mean by that is taking all those people that sort of reborn the Occupy movement and have a political agenda that talks about raising standard of living and giving people a voice. I'm just reading a book now called Social Insecurity, about the con of 401ks. We're privatizing our pension programs now so that we got to depend on Wall Street. Takes me back to 1985 and that chief economist who said, if they win, we're in trouble.
One short comment on what Leo said. You know, right now we're having a big conversation on immigration. Sometime back, we passed and negotiated a treaty called NAFTA with Mexico.
Is that mine?
What happened then is that when that treaty was implemented, farmers in Mexico who grew corn and other grains found themselves unable to compete. They lost their farms, and where do they go? To the U.S., as undocumented immigrants, because that's the only way they were going to survive. So those treaties, unless they're negotiated in a way that it really benefits both the Mexican workers or wherever we're negotiating the treaty with, as well as American workers, you wind up with misery on both sides of the border.
Steve, I just want to drop back to your original question and what Eliseo originally said. Yeah, you know, we used to have 35% of the workforce, now we're down to 11.5%, but I would note a couple of things. One, when it comes to votes, in this last election, we were about 18% of the vote. We've been as high as 25% of the vote in the last 4 cycles. So our members actually participating and get out more. But we are too small. And individually, none of the progressive groups can change the economy or get people elected alone. But when you put all the progressive groups together, we are in the high 70s, 80% of those groups support our values. And we were actually, we being the labor movement, we were actually pretty poor partners. Our idea in the past of a partnership was we had a problem, come help us fix our problem. When the problem's fixed, adios, the partnership dissolves. It was transactional. And what we're trying to do now is move from transactional relationship to a real functional relationship. And I'll give you a couple of examples about how it's different. We used to say, we would go to a community group and say, here's our program, come join us. We absorbed them. We had to control it. We had to take it over. And it was our issue. It wasn't your issue. It was our issue. Now we go to those same groups and we say, now we have a problem. Let's collectively look at that problem. Let's figure out how to solve that problem. And then let's execute that solution and strategy together so that they are at the table. We brought them into our convention. We've been meeting with them, with the progressive groups on a regular basis, because I'll use an old military term. We allow them to beat us in echelon, one group at a time, but when we're together, they can't beat us because we're such a large force in the country and we represent such a vast majority. And I want to say one other thing, because I think it ties into what Leo said. You know, we really don't endorse people because of politics. I mean, we don't endorse people because they're a Democrat. We endorse them because of the policies that we think that they'll implement. Now, conceitedly, more often than not, that's a Democrat, because that Democrats, we think, are more likely, in most instances, to enact policies that are good for working people. That fact that we are not beholden to any political party allows us to form coalitions with our partners, our community partners, and create strategic partnerships. One last point, what we're doing to help strengthen things out in addition to the partnerships. We have a program called Common Sense Economics. It's an analysis of the economy. And then it's a policy prescription for getting us away from the economy that we currently have and into one that works for everybody, or at least a larger percentage of the people that are being denied the benefits of the economy right now. Our goal this year, in 2015, is to get that program to between 2 and 3 million workers, the vast majority of which will be non-union workers, so that they understand how they got here. They understand that the economy is not like the weather. There's nothing that you can do about it. It's nothing but a bunch of rules. Those rules decide the winners and the losers, and those rules are made by the men and women that we elect. And they'll either be good rules or bad rules. Common sense economics sort of breaks it down that way. It'll allow us to get out further and have those people begin to vote in their own self-economic interests. And to prove that it works, we have a group called Working America, about 3.5 million strong right now. Working America no one is in a union. We go out into neighborhoods cold, we knock on a door, ask them if they want to vote, if they want a stronger voice in the elections, if they want a different agenda. They've been joined at about 25,000 a week is what we end up getting. And we get about 4 out of every 6 that we knock on, we get them. In the last election, after we gave them the program, they voted 76% for Barack Obama. Our active members voted 75% for Barack Obama. And these are people that call themselves ultra-conservatives, born-again Christians, gun owners, and everything. But when they get the facts about the economy and an analysis about it, they then begin to see that it's in their own self-interest, and they come our way. So that's another way that we're reaching out.
So with labor's density, labor's overall numbers declining somewhat, I wanted to ask, what are the best opportunities? What's the best group of workers that unions should pursue in terms of organizing? And I wanted to start that question with you, Eliseo.
Well, one of the things that we've been focusing on is obviously low-wage workers, home care workers, janitors, people that in some cases were never considered employees. They were considered independent contractors, and they've been joining by the hundreds of thousands all over the country. And so I think there's a major opportunity there. But we're also been supporting the Fight for 15, which is not immigrants. Most of them are people that lost their jobs in the steel mills and now are working at McDonald's or Burger King. Most of the jobs there are no longer just kids going to do that job while they're in school. We're looking at people now that are doing this as a full-time job. And so we're going out and we're working with them in order to be able to start demanding that their employers pay them a living wage. And I mean, tell you, we've been having tremendous participation and success all over the country. So I think from our unit's perspective, that's an area. But I certainly don't believe that that's the only place, because we're also doing a lot of work in organizing adjunct university professors. Now, you know, to me, when I first heard the professors speak about their wages and their conditions, I was blown away, because I thought universities, everybody makes a great wage because they're training the leaders of tomorrow. And they are, in effect, contingent workers as well. They're not immigrants. They're not poor people that are in the same situation as janitors. So we have to then be able to, all of these people who understand they're getting screwed, and what they need is a strategy and a plan on how to make this better. And I think the opportunities are there for all of us.
Any adjunct professors in here? Don't be afraid to raise your hand now. Come on.
Any grad students in here?
We're also in Allegheny County, and the one thing about Allegheny County, the main occupation now are healthcare and education, not steel anymore. So we're also organizing adjuncts. The thing that is really hits home to me is how exploited they are. Mm-hmm. No rights, no benefits. They get to teach by class, and the university sets the price of the class. 70% of the professors in most universities now are adjuncts. And when you ask yourself, how do you end up in an education system where the kid graduates, they have 30, 40, 50, 60, 80, $100,000 worth of debt, and the people who are asked to teach them are almost damn starving. Some of you may have read the story about the adjunct professor at Duquesne University who actually died. She was living inside the university because she couldn't afford to pay the heat. Single woman who had been teaching for 30 years died in the university. So not to compete about it, but the fact of the matter is there's lots of low-wage workers that need a voice. This morning, I have to confess, I went to McDonald's, but I went for the coffee.
Stayed for a while too, didn't you?
No. I went to the drive-thru, and I've been going to this McDonald's for 15 years down by my neighborhood because they make good morning coffee. When you go to McDonald's in the morning, you see seniors who are working on the night shift, mm-hmm. and they're making next to nothing. And part of the reason they're there is they need to supplement their already inadequate pension, or their inadequate health care, or their inadequate something else. And I'm optimistic that between the reality setting in, that we all have to join together, and that we're going to make a difference, there'll be a rebirth and a reorganization of the economy in America. Because a long time ago, when I was very young, I heard a saying, unless you change direction, you will continue in the direction in which you are heading. And I thought, how stupid. Now that I'm much older, think about all the directions in which, if we keep going, what's going to happen to this country. Eventually, we're going to have to change direction. And the best group to change direction is the labor movement and progressives coming together. We created the Blue-Green Alliance. We've now got 14 million affiliated members through the unions and the environmental movement that are in that alliance. Do we agree all the time? No, hell, most of the time we fight. But the thing is, we're fighting inside the club, and we're developing a common agenda so that we can move forward and have a voice. It's not good jobs versus a clean environment. It's either both, or we'll have neither over the long haul. And we're doing that kind of work.
You know, Steve, never before in my life have I seen the that workers, not some workers, not most workers, but all workers need the voice of collective bargaining on the job. Because not only is it low-wage workers that are getting hammered, if you look at just what happened this year, in the first 6 months of this year, people with advanced degrees, wages fell 3% in the first 6 months of this year. So while we work on low-wage workers, domestic workers, home care workers, and a number of others, I think everybody up and down the scale really does need a voice on the job and the power of collective bargaining. And quite frankly, one of the things that we're looking at now is trying to bring collective bargaining to workers that don't yet have a union, giving them the statutory right to be able to bargain with their employers, bargain for a better life and a better share of what they produce. And an employer would be required to recognize them. And we'll be introducing legislation early next year that'll ingrain that in the law and say to every worker out there, you have a right to collective bargaining. Now, we think we'll do it better than people that don't have the experience, but they'll at least get the chance and they'll at least get a taste, being able to take a fair share of what they produce.
My 2 cents for a second on adjunct professors. So the first time in my life I'm teaching an adjunct course, and I see it takes about 20, 25 hours a week to do it properly. So in a 13-week semester, that's like 250, 300 hours, and a lot of adjuncts get paid $2,500, $3,000 a course. Do the math, it's about $10 an hour.
It's like ridiculous.
Yeah. So I'm not allowed to express opinions, I'm just expressing facts.
I'll express them for you.
So some business folks I speak to tell me that, yes, we as a country needed unions back in the 1930s and 1940s when workers were badly mistreated, when conditions of coal mines were terrible. But they say nowadays American workers are treated well, they have good benefits, many workers are in the middle class, and they say, we don't need unions anymore. That's why people aren't pushing to join unions. So I wanted to ask you your response.
That's a myth. And in fact, in all the polling that we've done, the AFL-CIO has done, I'm sure SEIU, all the polling's done, if workers were given a free choice to join a union, more than 60% would join today. America has the worst labor laws in the major industrialized world. And in fact, if you look at what went on with the Auto Workers Union and Volkswagen, there's no way that a senator from America and a governor ought to be able to stick their nose in a union organizing campaign. That ought to be illegal. It is in almost any other advanced democracy on the planet. And in the case of the steelworkers, we organized a place called Golden Dragon. Guess what? Chinese state-owned enterprises building a tube mill in Alabama. The governor of Alabama writes a letter to the workers in the union and says, don't join the union. Now that goes to what the economic elites of this country want, a low-wage agenda. And if we continue in that direction, this system can't sustain itself. 91%, think of this, 91% of the profits of the Fortune 500 companies, on average, have been spent buying back shares or paying dividends. That leaves 9% for wages, benefits, research and development, marketing, anything else. Don't tell me that that's an economy that can sustain itself. We need to be the leaders of a progressive movement that's going to change the economic direction of the country, and we can do it with common sense economics, and the AFL-CIO put together a great program. We just need to push it out even harder.
So let me just say, Steve, that's PR, not reality. The reality is that anytime there's a nominee to the National Labor Relations Board that they even suspect is not going to be pro-business, they block that nomination. They have been working to undermine workers' collective bargaining rights. Again, let's go back to Wisconsin, Ohio, Indiana, Nevada. And the truth is that if you look, and I've seen it as a lived experience talking to workers, but every economist will tell you that we have the greatest economic inequality in a long time, that the rich are getting richer, the corporations are doing better, and what they're doing with the money is what Leo says. And if workers were doing so great, we wouldn't be seeing those statistics about the income inequality. And the fact is that workers are doing worse now than ever. Look at Walmart. one of the largest corporations in the world. No health care for the employees. They're just going to yank it. Look at what's happening all over the country and the contingency of work. Workers need a union more than they ever have. They need ability to have a voice on the job. Now, we have to do our part to make sure they do it. But I think it also is an issue for the American people. When workers do badly, communities do badly. It's no accident that Detroit's in the toilet, and I think that if it's a society, do we want to be a society of the future of low-wage service workers? Where very rich corporations who at the drop of a hat, if they can lower the taxes, if they move to Canada, they will do it because they don't have a commitment to their communities. I always subscribe to the theory of Henry Ford, who said, I want to pay my workers enough so they can afford to buy my cars.
So we're...
First of all, I'll start off with the notion, Steve, that union workers make a little bit better than $200 a week more than their non-union counterparts in the same industry with the same educational level. If you're a woman, it's higher. It's a higher percentage. If you're a Latino, it's higher. And if you're an African American, it's higher. You do better for yourself by being in a union. We also are likely to have more benefits. We're likely to vote more often. We're likely to have pensions. We're likely to have all of those things.
Live longer.
And in a day, well, because we have better health care generally. So today, when you have stagnant wages and 87% of the people that voted said their wages are flat or falling, they would do well to have the power of collective bargaining. But let's move beyond even that. Employers that say unions aren't necessary. We have in the construction industry the best apprenticeship programs in the world. We train, and most people don't know this, other than the military, the labor movement trains more people, adults in the United States, than any university out there. We do it, only the military does more training than what we do. So we provide skills, we provide our journey people with additional skills, with new material, know how to do things, all the new methodology so that they're more efficient. That's something that they can't do alone. The non-union construction people try to poach our people because of the training we can do. Employers can't do that alone. So that's another thing. And then let's talk about a cooperative effort. I happen to believe in a global economy, we do better, we face the competition better when an employer and a union get together and they can do a lot of things to make themselves more efficient and give more autonomy to the workforce. Those type of projects survive best when there's a union there. Because when you go in as an individual or without a union, instead of cooperation, and most often it becomes co-option. And so we provide a method to make them more efficient in the workplace and in the global economy that they can't do alone. Now some do, but a vast majority of them don't. So the benefits of a union not only ring towards the employees with better wages and better benefits, but they ring towards the employer as well with better trained, more efficient workers, and they benefit to the community because those higher wages translate out into a higher standard of living and better schools and things like that in the community. And so anybody who would dare say that a worker doesn't need a voice today, I'd ask them just this one simple question. What kind of bargaining power you think you have with GE? Let's say you're a skilled manager and you walk in and you say to GE, look, I want a raise, and they say no. What's your recourse? Those same people will tell you, leave. But we don't want to leave at the wage level. We want to make those jobs better. And so we stay and we fight. And I love the people that say that. They're the same people that say that there's a skills gap in the United States. There is no skills gap in the United States because if there was, wages for those skilled people would be rising. And they're not. They're falling. What we have is a job gap in the United States. We're not creating enough good jobs to put people into them. That's the problem that we have.
So we're meeting at the University of Chicago, which is the kind of epicenter of freshwater economics, of free market economics.
Yeah, I remember that guy.
And I imagine many people here, many on the economic side of things here, are not fans of labor unions. They say labor unions get in the way of the free market. They gum up the works. They make companies less efficient, and that's all the more dangerous at a time when. So how would you respond to them?
Bullshit.
There's a response. You don't need to say anymore.
Listen, I come out of the mills, man. Here's the reality of this. There is no such thing as the free market. All markets are managed. All markets have rules. A totally free market would be anarchy. And we ought to just quit buying that malarkey. All markets are managed by a set of rules, and it depends on whose behalf those rules are being managed for. That's number one in that argument. Secondly, if you go way back to about 1972, Lewis Powell, who a couple of weeks before becoming appointed by Nixon to the Supreme Court, wrote a manifesto. I still call it the Powell Manifesto. I don't know what its official name was. And he laid out a multi-year, multi-segment plan where he said business doesn't have enough political power. And here's the way for business to get political power. This last Tuesday passed. That was the ultimate of Lewis Powell's manifesto. It took them that many years to get it totally implemented. One of the labor movement's problems, one of the progressive movement's problems, is we lay out our program at election time. If we don't succeed, we go back and refigure out what can we do the next program. And I think one of the things that we need to do is concentrate on bringing all progressive groups together, finding ways to do it in as many different ways as we can. It's not going to be one shoe fits all. And once we've got all progressive groups together, put our program together. It's a 1 year, 2 year, 3 year, 5 year, 6 year, 10 year. It's a cycle that we've got to go to take back the country on behalf of working people. I don't expect any of our members are going into the mills expecting to come out millionaires. They're expecting to go to mills and come out safe, come out with enough money that they can raise their kids, hopefully have their kids not have so much college debt that they can't buy a house till they're 45 years old, and build that program. And there's no reason, when you look at the amount of wealth that this country generates, there's no reason why we couldn't have that. And it's about how that wealth is being allocated. And I'm not some raving socialist. I am a socialist, but I'm not raving about it. The fact of the matter is that the country would be better off if we found a way to make sure that everyone had enough of a piece of the pie that they could work with dignity and retire with dignity. And that's all they want. We failed in expressing that on everybody's behalf. Unions aren't just for organized workers. They're for everybody.
So in early 2011, I was in Madison covering the Battle of Madison when Governor Scott Walker and the Republican legislature enacted, or were pushing to enact legislation to curb collective bargaining by public sector unions. I remember I was back home in New York and talking to my mother, and she was saying, I don't get it. She said, when I was growing up in the Depression, all these people said, I want what those union members have. They have great health coverage, they have pensions, they have paid vacations. And people were pushing to join unions, and my mother remarked, but now the folks in Wisconsin are saying, I don't think those union members should have what they have. They have too much. They have health benefits, I don't. They have pensions, I don't. And there's been this sea change in many ways from solidarity to anti-solidarity. And I wanted to ask you why you think that has happened, what can be done about it.
Because they've had 30 years of falling or stagnant wages, and they're angry about it.
Well, but why they're in ways angry at the unions rather than...
Yeah, they're angry at all of us.
Steve, I want to just mention one last point on your last question about we're not needed. Today, I have some good news for you. Today, Donnie Blankenship, the CEO of Massey, was indicted on 4 counts. Yeah, you should applaud. One of those counts was conspiring to violate the health and safety laws. And Donnie Blankenship would have been running free if it hadn't been for the workers at that mine. Those were non-union workers that ultimately worked with the union to do that. There's another reason why we need a union. Look, why is it happening? Well, the patron saint of the University of Chicago Business School, Milton Friedman, started neoliberalism a number of years ago and said, get everything out of the way of the market. Anything that gets in the way of the market is bad. Unions get in the way of the market, it's bad. Do away with it. Now, he started off his first experiment, and by the way, he believed that in time of crisis, you can't interject new ideas. So his job right here at this university was to make sure that neoliberalism stayed on the shelf so that when the proper crisis came about, they could interject it. And the proper crisis was first Chile. They interjected neoliberalism into Chile with workers were killed, that workers would disappear, and so they accepted it, and they're still paying the price for that. And we're still paying the price for that after 30 years of attacks here and using neoliberalism. And by the way, our common sense economics dissects his theory and the quote free market theory. And we're still paying the price here in the United States for what old Milty did for us and what he brought for us. And so we're going to try to change that, give people the facts about it. And let me just ask you a question. How's that neoliberalism working out for you? How's it doing for you? You got better pensions? You got better health care? You get better wages? You got a stronger economy? You got better retirement? All they tell us in this country is we can't afford it. The richest nation on the face of the earth at its most rich point in time, and we can't afford it. That's, to use Leo's term, pure, unadulterated bullshit. Because we can't afford it if we if we prioritize those things, every American could have health care. Every American could have a decent pension. Every other country out there, the industrialized countries, figured out a way to do it except us. And old Uncle Milty is still there trying to peddle it, that theory.
A little aside, we're also the largest energy union representing workers in refineries. And we had our pre-collective bargaining session a couple weeks ago. And we had workers over from the Scandinavian countries. We had workers from the oil industry in Norway. Do you know what Norway charges the oil companies for their offshore drilling? 80% of the revenue. Norway's healthcare program and pension program, if you were born this morning, it's paid for when you retire. So I said to him, you must be getting a lot of trouble from the oil industry. He said, no, they're happy. It doesn't have to be the way it is. It's about who sets the rules and why they're set.
So over the past 10 or 15 years, there's been an explosion in the number of alt-labor groups, non-union worker advocacy groups, especially for low-wage immigrant workers, like Make the Road by Walking in New York, Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida, the Workers' Defense Project in Texas. The Freelancers Union is another alternative. A lot of people say this is very promising for the future of American workers. I want to ask you, what do you, I'll begin with Eliseo, then ask you, Rich, how promising is this, and can these alternate labor groups begin to achieve as much as unions have in terms of wages and benefits?
Well, Steve, we work very closely with all of these groups on immigration reform, on campaigns to raise wages for everybody. And I go back to my point that a union is people coming together for a mutual benefit. I don't make a distinction. If workers get together and they struggle together, that's a labor group. That's a union by another name, and that's why we're supporting them, and have created relationships, because I think that's what we need. We need more ways and more organizations of workers coming together to fight together.
Steve, we need 1,000 new ways to do things, and we need to try all 1,000 of them. And those that work, keep them, and those that don't work, get rid of them. There's a thing, we need young people, and what we used to do, the mistake that we made when we would go to young workers, we'd go out and say, here's what we have to offer. And young workers would say, yeah, that's really good, and I'm glad, it's really nice, but guess what? I have 3 employers every week, and it doesn't quite work for me. And we'd go, yeah, we know, but come join us anyway, because this is what we have to offer. Now we don't do that. We go to young workers and we ask them what they need us to be. We go to domestic workers and we say, what do you need us to be? And we try to make ourselves into what we need to be. And young workers are now part of our governing structure. They're on our general board, our executive board. They meet with us. We're bringing them into our central labor councils, our state feds, because we need them. Young workers have a thing that I call critical imagination. And it's a new way to try different things in a world that is very, very complex. And we need that critical imagination. And we need to try every single one of those things and not be afraid to fail, because not all of them will work. But I know this, what we're doing right now sure ain't leading us to the promised land. And so I say hooray to every one of them. Anytime there's a workers group, whether it's a day laborers that we're working with, whether it's taxi cab, whether it's car wash workers that we created a hybrid model over, all of those things need to be tried, and the more that we try them, the better off that we are.
And just one last comment, Steve, on that is that it's not just a matter of working with them to improve wages, but they're also very engaged in the electoral process because they see that as a way of being able to elect people who will deal with their issues. One example is all the work that we're doing with the immigrant rights movement. And so we have worked with hundreds of organizations and are beginning to increase the citizenship rates, the voter registration rates, and the turnout rates among immigrants. And if you look at the numbers, people there are voting at a much higher rate than union members or anybody else. What we need to work on is increasing the turnout rates, and that has the potential for beginning to create a different electorate in this country. And I think that's what we need in order to be able to not just be an issue for labor, but for everybody.
Okay, there's a microphone here for those of you in the audience who have questions to the panelists.
All right.
We'll never get to all those.
Okay, I got my signal to take questions.
That's better than calling about.
We'll watch that bottle.
In this discussion of suppressed wages,
Closer to the mic.
okay, in the rhetoric in the public discourse discussion of increasing wages, as a tech worker, I'm amazed how many of the elites refuse or are totally ignorant of the wage suppression that's being caused by allowing in over 1.4 million legal workers every year. We've allowed in 7 million since 2008, 17 million since 2000. And the SEIU is totally AWOL on this. And the Department of Professional Employees, where's Paul Almeida? Nowhere since 2006 when he arranged my testimony on the H-1B.
What's your question?
My question to you is, why aren't the unions saying, as Samuel Gompers said, and as Cesar Chavez said with the Procero program, why don't we have a moratorium on immigration until we get a tighter labor market so we can raise wages for American citizens and change the laws so that Americans are first in line for jobs in our own country? Where are the unions on this? I am not seeing it, especially, I like you, but you're not, you're in support of 30 million new foreign legal workers in the next 10 years if S744 got passed.
Thank you. So we'll start with Rich and then Eliseo.
Let me respond to that. First of all, we were responsible for negotiating the Senate bill. Let me start with the bigger point. The immigration system in this country is broken. It is flat broken. You have 11.5 million workers, undocumented workers, who get abused, who get cheated out of wages, who get denied health and safety rights, and they are used to drive every one of your wages down. Until we get them out of the shadows and give them rights, then they can enforce them, you're going to pay the price. Now, where have we been? Where have we been? Now, where have we been? We've been in the forefront of this battle since day one. the labor movement, me specifically, I negotiated the Senate bill that put a limit on the visas that come in, the H1, the H2Bs, and all the other visas. And in addition to that, we created there a system that is fair, because what do you have right now? The employers come in and they say, oh, there's a shortage of engineers. Yes, if you pay engineers $18,000 a year, there's a shortage, because no one will work for $18,000 a year. We created a system where there would have been a government agency that actually determines whether there is a shortage or isn't a shortage, so they couldn't do that. And second of all, listen before you talk, and I'll listen to you, I promise. So before, and now, they could bring them in at any wage they wanted. What we negotiated is, when they bring them in, they have to bring in workers at the prevailing wage or the market rate, whichever is higher. So they won't be able to bring in an engineer from India and pay those engineers $22,000 whenever our engineers are getting $75,000. Because if they can, they'll buy 3 for the price of 1. Now, we've been in that fight every single day. Maybe you don't know it. Go on our website. Go read the speeches that I've done. Read the testimony that I've done. Go through the fights that I've been. I believe fervently, with every fiber of my body, brother, that until we fix this system, every worker in the country is paying the price for it, and those undocumented workers are getting killed, and they're getting cheating out of wages, and I, for one, am not going to allow that to happen as long as I can speak.
Let me just say, I agree that we need to fix the whole system, but let me speak specifically to what you asked, which is guest workers. Now, for everybody that know, there's H-1Bs, which are the high-tech primarily. There's H-2A, H-2B, and all kinds of other things, including kids that come here on foreign exchange and are told to go, they can go get jobs like they did at Hershey's, and they get put to work at horrible wages, and these kids from all over the world walked out on strike. So the reason sucks. My father was a guest worker coming from Mexico in the Bracero program. They have no rights. If they complain, the employer yanks their visa and they're out of here. They can't use the courts because they have a contract that is their sole responsibility. So one of the things that we've said as part of immigration reform, we need to make sure that the immigrants of the future have a way that they can hear in a safe, legal, and orderly manner. The best way to do that is we got to change the current age programs to provide for the following. One, that they have full protection of all of our labor rights and labor laws, as well as health and safety laws, including the right to organize into a union. Secondly, that they have portability of employment, so if an employer is cheating them, they can do what any of us would do. We can walk away without losing our visa. Loosen that grip that the employer has on these workers and their bargaining power. Third, that they need an ability to be able to enforce their rights, whether it be in a court, through a union, or just walking away. And if we can do all of these things, we will be able to make sure that all these workers, first of all, there will be hopefully no undocumented, but anybody else that comes in the future has the same rights that you do, and everybody can work together to improve the conditions for everybody, not just for themselves.
Let me add to what was said by my two colleagues. The problem is compounded, that you have undocumented workers who are exploited almost beyond belief, and we see it across every sector of the economy. Mm-hmm. Then, on top of the undocumented, you have the guest workers. And the guest workers, what Rich said and what was said here, it's all about the low-wage agenda. It's about what that economist said that I overheard in 1985. Follow the money. Who's making it and who's not? And unless we fix immigration, including guest worker allocations and guest worker rights, it's going to be used to push our wages and benefits down. And President Obama is going to make a decision, hopefully, in the next few days. And when he does, and if he does, and I hope he does, because he should have learned his lesson by now, you know, you can't trust these guys. They've broken every promise they made to him. They're going to vilify him. We need to stand up for him. We need to stand up that finally he's going to take a step. It's not going to be perfect, but he's going to take a step towards fixing a broken immigration program. And it doesn't just happen in HB1 visas. They're building a huge energy complex down in Louisiana. They're building a compound that's going to hold 6,000 guest workers. And they're going to live within that compound. And how the hell are we going to organize them? Who's going to hold their passport and their visa? Mm-hmm. Who's going to do what if they say, look, it was unsafe today, we shouldn't have done that work?
You know,
put you back on a plane?
Leo, that's a very, very important point about that you made it too, Eliseo. Under the current system, the visa goes to the employer. Under the system that we had negotiated, the visa went to the worker. So that if you didn't pay the worker fair wages or you didn't treat them fairly, they could go. And the employer didn't get another card to match it, to fill in behind it. There was a flat limit on the number of people that came in, and it would have stopped a lot of the abuse of these workers. And when you see what happens to them, we see how they're cheated out of wages. It makes your heart sick. Right here in Chicago, right here in this city, we had a group of construction workers that worked 6 weeks. 6 weeks. And the employer skipped out on them, never paid them. And it was the bricklayers union, our affiliate, that actually went after that employer and got them paid. But if we hadn't been around to help them, 6 weeks, and they would have walked away with nothing. They got free labor for 6 weeks. That drives everybody's wages down. That's why the system's broken, and we really have to fix it. It has to lead to a path to citizenship, to the people that are already contributing to this country in a good, positive way.
So let me just make one last thing. I promise. Leo made a reference that the president's going to act, and I do believe he's going to act. However, he's not going to address the conversation we've been having with the H's, because he can only prioritize enforcement of the law. He cannot change the law. And so once the president acts, it will be good. It'll help a whole bunch of people. But we still need full congressional action on immigration reform, because that's the only way we can deal with the problem you were talking about.
Amen,
that's the
brother.
only way we can deal with the problems of the future.
Amen,
so we got to keep
Amen.
pushing.
And this is from the labor movement's #1 activist on immigration reform and the #1 spokesman on immigration. The very, very, very patient lady at the front of the line. Okay.
I didn't get my patience from my dad, let me tell you. My name is Susan Sedlowski, and
Where's your old man? He told me he was coming.
he was going to be here, but he went back to Florida.
Oh,
It was
Christ.
getting too cold for him.
Good steelworker pension. Okay, keep going.
And a great boycott supporter.
That's right.
Anyway, my name is Susan Sedlowski Garza, and I'm area vice president for Chicago Teachers Union Local 1. Very proud member, by the way. I just have a question, actually, Mr. Trumka. The question is for you. I'm a firm believer in agitate, educate, organize, right? And I was really taken aback by the numbers that of voter turnout after they attended your Working America program. So how does one get in touch with you to get that and implement it? In Chicago, CTU has taken on a lot of social justice unionism issues. We're trying to educate people to get them to come out. We have a very important mayoral race happening. There's a lot of our members that are running for city council, me being one of them in the 10th Ward. We've taken on the challenges. It's time that workers are standing up and rising up to the challenge. I mean, unions don't typically go into the political arena, but CTU's doing it. So I guess my question is, how do we find out about getting into
See
working
this man
America?
right here. Stand up, Jorge.
Jorge.
Jorge is the head of the CLC here in Chicago.
Okay.
He can talk to you about Working America. In fact, he's been working with Working America for a significant period of time to give you all the information you need.
Okay, thank you. And Jorge, I'll get you at the door.
See, Working America usually works with swing states, but now Illinois has become a swing state.
Oh,
Jeff Berkowitz, alum from the University of Chicago. My question is for each of you, each of the panelists. I'd like to get at least a short answer, if I could, from each of you.
Wrong group.
Approximately 80% of the black and Hispanic fourth graders in the Chicago public schools do not read at grade level. They read at lower than grade level. That's been true for at least 2 decades. Despite all the reform, almost no change. Barack Obama, when he was here, sent his kids not to the public schools, but to this school, the lab school at the University of Chicago, and did the same in Washington, D.C. Mayor Rahm Emanuel also opts out. So the question is, they opt out. Rahm Emanuel opts out of the public schools, goes to the private schools. Don't you want to give those parents of kids in CPS, black, Hispanic, earning $30,000 or less, the same kind of choice to take their $15,000, that's what we spend per kid per year in CPS, take that $15,000 and go to the school of their choice. If they're happy, stay in the Chicago public schools. If they're not, go to the charter school. Competition, free markets. Milton Friedman suggested that 50 years ago. Don't you agree at least this one time?
He was wrong then and he's wrong now.
Well, tell me why. Tell me why.
Why? Because rich people will be able to take the $15,000 and send their kids somewhere. Poor people won't, and you will rob the public school system. You will ultimately eliminate the public school system in this country, which is what we were known for, what we are heralded for, and what was the best education system in the world, and you will transfer it to for-profit schools. When that happens, we lose. Milton was wrong 50 years ago, and he's wrong now.
Let me ask the others. Can we get an answer from the others?
I'll totally agree with what Richard just said, but I want to add a caveat. First of all, schools shouldn't be for profit, number one. Number two, when you indiscriminately close 50 schools, what you're doing is increasing the class size for teachers, and at the same time you're trying to suppress teachers' wages, and you want to attract the best teachers that you can, pay them decently, reduce the class size so they can take time with the kids. I have a daughter, hang on a minute, I have a daughter who had a learning disability. She got in one of these blue ribbon schools where I live in Pittsburgh, a public school, but a blue ribbon charter school. They wanted to teach her Spanish in grade 6 when she couldn't do grade 4 math. And because they wanted their blue ribbon under it was in the Clinton days. So that what we ought to recognize is next to parents, teachers spend the most time with our kids. And I want the best teacher I can get, and I want them to be paid well, and I don't want to privatize the damn school system.
My name is Lynn Hughes. I'm the founder of the A. Philip Randolph Pullman Porter Museum. We're the only black labor history museum in the nation, located right here in the city of Chicago in the Pullman community. And I want to ask, I know we're short and we got people behind us fighting because we got questions, but what I want to ask the three of you, from my observation, happen to be in a unique position to hear conversations from rank and file and non-union people. And so this is my observation. I don't want to ask if the commitment from the three of you, if you will work together to foster inclusion in the unions and with the community, create partnerships with the people. I like the idea of the grassroots, and advancement of African Americans in leadership positions in the unions and not just token positions. That's the question I'm asking. That's my question to the three of you. You don't have to answer now, but I'm just saying.
Right now, I'm absolutely committed to all three of those. I've spent my entire life fighting prejudice and racism. I've just out in Ferguson fighting it again. Where I see it crop up, I try to do something. when our members wouldn't vote for Barack Obama in 2008. I stood in front of our membership and said, look, two things. If you're not voting for Barack Obama because he's black, you're absolutely wrong and you need to rethink. If you're not voting for Hillary Clinton because she's a woman, you're absolutely wrong and you need to rethink. You need to look at the policies that are there. All three of those are admirable. I've tried to live with all three of those. If you look at what I've done at the AFL-CIO and the anti-union movement, we do represent the people that we are. I mean, our leadership represents, it looks like, the people that we represent. So I unequivocally agree with all three of those and say, yes, I have and will continue to.
Good. Email works.
I'll be quick and agree with everything Rich said, but I want to say something out of program, a little bit of self-congratulations here maybe. In Pittsburgh, in what's called the Hill District, our union is running a program on our own called Breaking the Chains of Poverty. And we get young men and women who have been treated wrongly by the justice system, and we bring them and we put them into training programs that we run, and then we go find them jobs. And our success rate now is 62%. And we're taking young men and women who otherwise wouldn't get a second shot, and we're not only giving them a second shot, we're getting them into good jobs. Secondly, we don't do the hiring in our union. Employers do, but we're now running a program in our union called the Advanced Leadership Program, where the only qualification is that you're a minority and you want to be part of the union, and we're doing development programs so they have the confidence to run for office and take over our union. Eventually there'll be a black woman running this union if I live long enough.
So absolutely, look at me. I happen to believe that the labor movement should reflect the face of its members, but not just the labor movement. We should do it all across society, and what we need is real inclusion, not tokenism.
You're here. Okay, I'm told time is up, and I thank you all for coming.
I want to ask a question. I belong to the Teamsters. I have a question. Now, the Teamsters, I belong to Local 743. Our steps were taken away 20 years ago. They never fought to get it back. On the other side, the hospital, they have steps, they get bonuses, we get nothing, and we're talking about skilled people. What can we do to get a union to do its job? I have been to Washington, to the Teamsters International. I get nothing but the runaround. And you know, you guys, you all make it up into six figures. I got nothing against that. I believe in capitalism, but I think you should earn your money. You're talking about capitalism, you earn your money. We're not getting paid here on the campus what we should. They're not even paying us according to our grade step, because our steps were taken away. They were not fought to get it back, and people who are coming in are starting out with the same amount of money that people who have been working 10 to 15 years ago. What can we do to make our union work for us so I can believe in unions again? I want unions.
Which union are you in?
Let me tell you what I did. I was part of the mine workers, and we had a guy that headed our union that was absolutely horrible. He thought the union existed to serve him and not him to serve the membership. We started a movement. It was called the Miners for Democracy. And we got involved. We got grassroots people involved. We came together and we suffered some early defeats. We lost elections, but we kept at it. And ultimately we took our union over. We democratized it and made it the most democratic organization out there. And I am a product of that democracy. I would have never been able to get elected in a free democratic vote if we hadn't changed that. What I can say to you is, one, you need to get involved at the grassroots and bring all your fellow workers out, because it is your union. It's your union, sister, and you have a right to have that union speak for you and amplify your voice. And if it's not, then collectively we ought to get together.
People, I speak read, write fluent German. I worked and lived in Germany for 28 years as executive secretary for Price Waterhouse, Procter & Gamble. And I come back here, this union does nothing for us. You got grown people making less than $30,000 a year, skilled people. Thank you so much. You belong
to a local union, so take over the local union and take it over and do the bargaining, and that's the secret.
Thank you, sister.
Okay. Thank you.
Wonderful panel.